G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. For the benefit of those viewers of mine who do not subscribe to The Guardian or read the Glen Innes Examiner, this is Badja Sparks, aka Matthew Sparks, Senior. There are two Matthew Sparkses. Badja is the husband of Carol Sparks. Carol Sparks is the Mayor of Glen Innes. I've known Badger and Squirrel for a long time, probably over 35 years. Squirrel was the midwife at the elective home birth of my son Matthew, which happened on the couch in Red Range. I live at Dundee. Badger and Squirrel live at Waitalabar. Squirrel, under the name Carol, is Mayor of Glen Innes. My basic plan for this video is that I will read from Badger's actual article, while you're going to kind of get to look at the map of Waitalabar. And here we have what used to be called the Spa, and across the road from the Spa, that's where the Waitalabar School is situated, and the school oval, the bridge over the Man River, the front gate of Waitalabar, the road leading in to the old farmhouse. Once upon a time, Waitalabar was a cow farm. Cow farm was bounded by the river on two sides and by the old Grafton Road on two sides. That there is Waitalabar. Fairly obvious reasons. There's the west end of Waitalabar, there's the south side of Waitalabar, the east side of Waitalabar, and the north side of Waitalabar. And from those four sides and up the various gullies, sometimes along the ridges, various roads have made their way. One running up along here even. Thickly forested for that kind of country, but very steep. You've got a ridge more or less running up the centre of Waitalabar. Flat ground along here, this is the Man River Nature Reserve, where it says there's a set of yards there. That used to be the Banana Hut, built in about 1920 by a World War I veteran who looked after a herd of cows, grazing them down there. Went to Sydney to spend his annual paycheck, never came back. That one hut was the only actual communal thing in the whole valley. Nobody owned it, so anybody who felt like it would go and have a holiday there. Generations of kids grew up there, going there for holidays. Nobody knew each other. Nobody made a mess of the place. Everybody left it intact. And then, first hippie into the valley came in 1975, 74, and down over here at Lingeralong, there was a tea house. Mrs. McRae had a tea house. 3 times I've had a baby's bottle of milk warmed up in that tea house when that there was the highway to Grafton. But in 1963, the new road opened up. Newer, fancier, shinier, bitumen all the way, and Mrs. McRae's tea house closed. And eventually, the fellow who settled over here, he bought 4,000 acres over here, Lingeralong. And before he moved on to Lingeralong, the granddaughter of Mrs. McRae struck up a conversation with the first hippie in the valley, and she suggested to him that her and her partner, him and his partner, should be able to raise the money and buy Waitalabar, which at the time was a deceased estate being administered by a stock and station agency. This fellow was working on there for wages. He thought about it. The following week, Mrs. McRae's granddaughter decided 4 couples could raise the money faster. He didn't think 4 couples could make a living out of it as a cow farm. So he dropped out and he moved to linger along in the fullness of the time. And then he went on somewhere else, Paradise actually. The head of Paradise Creek. He didn't die, he's still around. So anyway, in 1977, I was on the night train coming home from boarding school, and on the Sydney to Glen Innes leg, I met Sherry Bell, Mrs. McRae's granddaughter. And Sherry Bell was on her way back from a radio spot on 2JJ in Sydney when she announced her vision to buy this place and set it up as a multiple occupancy alternative lifestyle community. A lot of people have that dream. Sherry Bell made it happen. Badja was one of the foundation members. Fact has it, which has grown into legend and a lot of people don't believe it, but it is fact. 1980, when they showed up, Badger and Squirrel were naked. They were each leading a different donkey. Their worldly possessions were on the donkeys. They had a baby on top of each donkey's pack. As a school child, I've walked the old Grafton Road to raise money for the Cubs. As a young man, I've walked the old Grafton Road with a backpack camping when I'd lost my driver's licence. I also rode a bicycle down it with a 110-pound camping pack on the bike, and then I got a lift to the top of the hill and I went down it again on the same bike with no load for the fun of it. I've hitched to Grafton from Waitalabar on the old road. Waitalabar it's where I go for markets, festivals, friendship, parties and funerals. I'm not sociable enough to live on a hippie commune. That's why I live on an endangered species sanctuary, 50 kilometres away by road. From Waylard Curradong Budderaldoon to Waitalabar. But the Waitalabans are my peer group. In Badger's letter, he's going to talk about fires in September, fires which started at Kingsgate, and sometimes were called the Red Range fires because Red Range is 3 kilometres that away, probably about sort of there on where the map runs out. So the Kingsgate fire was started by heavy operating earth-moving machinery. That fire went to the Kangawalla Game Reserve, so it gets called the Kangawalla fire. Or maybe it started at Kangawalla and it came to Kingsgate. Allowing for the prevailing wind, westerlies most of the day and easterlies during the morning, so it could have been either way. But anyway, that fire moulded along and came around here, and in September it went from Tommy's Rock over here on a Leather Jacket Ridge on Waitalabar. And if I was not the sort of person who actually sometimes takes rubbish to the dump, I could have shown you the fire maps, full colour, printed by my son. But I cleaned up. Okay, what else is there to say before I start reading the letter? Well, there is this. Waitalabar got burnt on the 8th of November, on the Friday. On Sunday, the 10th of November, I took a load of rubbish to the dump. And on my way back from the dump, I decided to stop in at the Deepwater Brewery and have the first beer for 3 months and discharge my responsibility as the oracle on the pinnacle, the loud-mouthed hermit, the fool on the hill, sort of like a old-fashioned Celtic bard, living off on top of the hill and telling the local stories. So I went in there and I offered to tell what I'd heard about the Waitalabar fire from my daughter, who was traffic control at Bald Knob, and my son, who's captain of the Rediston Rural Fire Service Brigade. And they were quite happy to say yes, say on. So I did. And after a while, a couple of blokes turned up. And whereas I was dressed in my dump clothes and smelling like a blowfly, these two fellas, both about my age, maybe a year or two older, they were all wearing their party clothes. But they too wanted to hear the story, so we went outside while they burned some tobacco. And then behold, the reason for their party clothes became clear to me. Because Squirrel, aka Carol Sparks, Mayor of the town, and Badger, and Mercurius Goldstein, and Jamaica, and Abigail turned up for Badger's 73rd birthday party. Probably more due to the doings of my son, I was invited to gate crash. because Friday night the house that he saved on Waitalabar was Jamaica's father's house. So yeah, I've heard it straight from the horse's mouth, very close to the event. That's good. No, no, do not jump on the maps. Don't jump on the maps. That's it. Yes, you can have yours too. There you go, girls. Stay there. Stay there. Oh, please, back. Just wait. Oh, you rotten little bugger. That's more better. Toe hole in the map. Ah, you get that. Swamp wallabies are just impulsive. Careful, clever, thoughtful, but kind of impulsive, especially when they're young. Okay, you just wait there. Well, I have a video to finish reading Badger's most excellent letter. Okay, suitably prepared. Let's see how we go with this. Pray for rain, pray harder for leadership. Quote, I have been a member of the Waitalabar community near Glen Innes for 40 years. We lost 2 of our community members in last Friday's bushfires, and the father of my great-grandson is in Royal North Shore Hospital being treated for severe burns while trying to save his house and his deceased neighbour. Nearly 50% of our able adults are members of the Waitalabar Rural Fire Service Brigade, a figure envied by many other brigades. Over those 40 years on our 3,500 acre property, we have had more than a dozen out-of-control bushfires that were successfully controlled, the majority in recent years. Over the last 3 years, in cooperation with the New South Wales Forestry, National Parks and the RFS, we have had very extensive controlled burning in the State Forest and National Park on our perimeters. On September 14, after an outbreak of fires across the northern tablelands, high winds caused embers to spot more than 10 kilometres onto the centre of Waitalabar, Leatherjacket Ridge. After an initial emergency, the fire weather abated, but over the next week, the fire spread across much of the property. In a large operation, more than 20 Rural Fire Service trucks, more than 100 firefighters, bulldozers and water bombers were successfully deployed to help defend our homes. All were saved. Much of Waitalabar was blacked out. Carol, bracket, Glen Innes Mayor with 20-year Rural Fire Service medal, close bracket, and I have a large cleared area around our double brick house. That September fire burned to our perimeter. This was just 2 months ago. Everything that should be done was done, and lots more. The fire that came on Friday, November 8, was of another order of magnitude altogether. A crown fire roaring in from the west on a hot afternoon with an 80 km/h wind. It wasn't on the ground, it was a firestorm in the air. Raining fire. There was no fuel on the ground. It was already burned. The heat ahead of the fire front ignited nearly everything in its path. Before he saw any flame, my neighbour's car exploded. They just escaped with their lives. See live footage on Monday's ABC 7:30. Our house was severely damaged, but not destroyed. We weren't home. I'll just sort of interlude there and interject. Badja told us on Sunday that the wind had ripped half the roof off the house. The solar batteries had exploded up against the wall. That explosion had blown in a window. The blown-in window had allowed a curtain to melt, but the inside of the house did not catch fire. Squirrel and Badger's house defended itself in a firestorm. There was no water damage because of the 3 trucks that were on Waitalabar during the firestorm, the Waitalabar truck, the Rediston truck, and the Dundee truck. None of them got there. But just think about that. Squirrel and Badger's house defended itself. The heat ahead of the fire front ignited nearly everything in its path. Before he saw any flame, my neighbour's car exploded. They just escaped with their lives. We weren't home. Others were not so lucky. Alibag has lost 2 lives and more than half our homes. Our school, our bridge. Another interlude, that's the bridge. It had a wooden deck underneath a concrete sheet and wooden timbers. Those short vertical black lines are the steel bolts that held the wooden deck underneath the concrete, held the wooden deck. It was a planked wooden deck underneath the concrete sheet. My son took that photo the morning after. Alibag has lost 2 lives and more than half our homes, our school, our bridge, our wildlife, and 40 years of work to build a community. What was our paradise is now ash. Thanks to the heroics of Alibag Rural Fire Service and residents, and the Rediston Rural Fire Service, who incredibly crossed the burning bridge to help us, some was saved. As I said, Dundee's Cat 1 tanker got across the bridge as well. Red Ranger's Cat 7 tanker got there, and by the time they got there, the bridge timbers were clearly alight. Somebody from Red Range remembered that it was a wooden bridge with a concrete sheet. Red Range ran out of water trying to put the bridge out. Back to Badja's letter. Some was saved. Quote, "Today's not the day to talk about climate change," unquote. ... No, yesterday was the day, or the day before, or the month before, or the year before, but it didn't get a mention. Now we have the reality, and the mention it gets is, don't talk about it now. So the politicians and the media turn the talk to hazard reduction burns, or the lack of them, as something else to blame on the inner city raving lunatics. We had a bushfire 2 months ago that burned most of our property. It didn't matter. It burned again. This is climate changed. We're in the worst drought recorded. 1 million hectares of bush have burned. Note to the gallery, this was printed on Tuesday, so it was probably written maybe last weekend. It's now 1.6 million hectares, not 1 million hectares. Time and tide waits for no one. Barnaby says it's green voters and the sun's magnetic field. Pray for rain, pray harder for leadership. Pray for rain, pray harder for leadership. So that's the main part of the video, and whatever else I say is just sort of me downloading collected thoughts and impressions that have come to me from mainly my son and my daughter, and some from Badja, some from Squirrel. I haven't really talked to too many other people who were there on the day. Seen a lot of my friends on news grabs, but for whatever it's worth, here's kind of the timeline. Glen Innes is down out over here. So Friday at 4 o'clock, I was talking to Badger in his shop, and he told me there was a fire that had sort of started up that day, and he was a bit worried. I went and did 1 round of shopping in Bilo. When I came out of Bilo, on that bearing there was a really, really thick, high, rich, fuel-rich plume of smoke. And I was pretty worried because I'd already been to my son's place of business, and his fiancée had told me that he had been called out to Bald Knob to a fire at Browns Road. So I knew he was out in that general direction. And I knew that Kingsgate, Kangawalla wasn't really fully extinguished, and I knew Alibag was downwind of it, and Badger had told me that there was a fire there today, and yeah, it was looking a bit scary. I went and did another round of shopping. When I come out on that bearing, there was no smoke. The westerly wind had blown all the smoke away. So I knew whatever happened was very short, sharp and intense. My daughter was on the ground here, stopping traffic because the Guida Highway, it was cut because of a backburn a couple of days earlier. At 6:56, refugees from Waitalaba started coming through her road stop, and she was told that Waitalaba is on fire. I got that text. My son had responded to Brett's call from the Waitalaba Brigade. When he got to here, to the town of Mitchell, to where the banana hut used to be, he found that Ray Keys's house was flat on the ground, and he had to drive through fire both sides of the road all the way to get to the burning bridge. There was another bunch of Waitalabans at the school oval, taking shelter there, because they didn't fancy running the gauntlet because they weren't in a fire truck. The school was already down. He went across the burning bridge, not realising that it was a wooden bridge. Both the houses at the front gate were down. He came along here, and on this little flat, that's where the fire station is. The fire station was already alight. The roller door was up. In the heat of the moment, no pun intended, while trying to get the truck out of the shed and go and be of some assistance to somebody with the firestorm erupting all around them, they just didn't have time to get back out of the truck and shut the door. And the visibility was so bad that young fella, me lad, couldn't find his way along here. And there were burning branches landing on the roof of his truck, so he went back and put more bit of water on the fire station. When the visibility cleared, he was able to get through to the old community house, the bakehouse, the shop, the community hub of Waitalaba, and he was invited to come up the other side of Sacred Mountain and save Bruce Walker's house because Bruce had a tank of water. That worked. Now, he got to here before the fire that had come here, which he couldn't break through here, got to there. So it wasn't that he actually drove through the firestorm so much as he waited here. The firestorm went up here, he got through to there, and he got out to there before the firestorm come back down, and he saved the house, he and his crew. And his crew followed him in, and he brought him back out, and they didn't need a band-aid between them. But they were wearing full PPE, and they had a fire truck, and they knew what they were doing, and my son is a very experienced firefighter. Not his first firestorm. I think 70 people were variously burned. 2 died, 2 hospitalised with skin grafts. Big Al is out of hospital. He's doing well. He might have to go and get a bit more done on one arm, but yeah, he's doing okay. He got burnt down here at the front gate. Tony Keating in here saved his house with sprinklers, couldn't save his workshop. Rocky managed to save his house with dry firefighting techniques because he didn't have any water. Shop Pete didn't have any water, and he saved his place by stamping on embers with his feet. There was one bloke who had automatic pop-up sprinklers, and he was away having a cataract operation done, so there was nobody to push the button, so none of the pop-up sprinklers or automatic systems were able to go into operation. Martin and Jenny Tonks were wrapped in wet sheets, standing at their front door, trapped inside the house, smoke too thick to be able to see anything or have any idea of where to go. Just as their own house got to be involved in the fire, a gust of wind, a sudden gust of wind, blew the smoke away from their front door. They could see where to go. Without hesitating, they ran out. They went across the burning area onto the already burned area, and with nothing but Jenny's mobile phone and the clothes they were wearing, they stood and watched their house and everything burn. Martin got hit by a burning branch. Didn't stop him giving me a hug in the supermarket, which is a big thing because he's not at the top of my fan club's list of members. He's one of the people who gets annoyed by my soundtrack pretty readily. But the fire's bringing a lot of people together, people who normally don't have much to do with one another. One of the best stories is the young fella who had not finished the house. So there was a concrete slab, there was 3 Besser brick walls in a U shape. When he saw the smoke and the fire and everything approaching at 80 kilometres an hour from 2 kilometres away, he had time to throw 1 sheet of tin up against the central wall, throw 2 more sheets of tin up against the first as walls, and he and his missus and his dog got under the 3 sheets of tin inside the enclosure of Besser bricks. They soaked the blanket in orange juice because it was the only liquid that they had, and for 3 hours the Besser bricks kept the radiant heat off the corrugated iron, and the corrugated iron kept the embers off the couple and their dog, and they survived the firestorm. Another lady got out of her house, realised a wallet was on the table, turned around, decided not to go back. She's alive, house is gone. Lou Stoker, with his dreadlocks and bare feet, went out to put an ember out, extinguish an ember attack, turned around, the whole forest was alight. He managed to video his own escape. And I found that clip. All you could see was bright cherry red incandescent burning air and black silhouetted tree trunks superimposed on the burning air. How he got out with his dreadlocks intact, running barefoot through a firestorm, I don't know. But that's Lou. For the record, when I was a first year student nurse at Concord Repat on a medical ward, a professorial medical ward, the deputy charge nurse was Tom Stoker, Lewis's father. Small world, Australia. Small world. My son was born on the living room couch at Red Range. Squirrel, the mayor of Glen Innes, was his midwife. I live at Dundee. Matthew's first RFS brigade was Dundee. Who was it who got down to Waitalabar? Dundee, Red Range, and Matthew with his Rediston truck. It's a small world, is Australia. And I have to agree with Badja. Pray for leadership. Can we get some actual, genuine leadership? Somebody who's not bedazzled by trying to return the Australian economy to surplus by cutting social services. Somebody who understands that applying austerity measures is not the way to deal with a national, international climate emergency. Somebody who takes a more scientific view than that of, say, Barnaby-ites, who believes in blaming greenies and sun's magnetic fields for the bushfires. Somebody who, like Barnaby-ites, he actually went on camera and said that if you paid any attention to the climate science or the environmental science, then you would never get anything done in Australia. So therefore, in his view, all science is to be ignored because he's so fixated on his plans for economic growth. And all economic activity depends on the presence of a pre-existing environmental surplus. And if you burn so much coal that you switch the bloody rain off, and then the drought produces the fuel with which to burn every living thing off the surface of the continent, then you haven't got any economic surplus. And the Barnaby-ites and the Morrisonists will have completely destroyed all hope of ever rebuilding the Australian ecology, because global warming is winning. Global warming is winning. What's going on now in November is just a foretaste of things to come. What's it going to be like in, say, 3 months' time, when all the fire trucks and all the air tankers need overhauling from constant use, when all the volunteer firefighters are ground down to a PTSD-affected quivering stub of a person? How long can people like my son respond to a call out when it means going away from his business that costs him $1,000 a day to open his doors or leave them shut? He's got to find that money. We are going to have to do something about the idea of recompensing the employers of our volunteer firefighters as an absolute bloody bare minimum. Another thing we're going to have to do is readjust Australia's attitude to the absolute villain of this story, which is the fence. This 120 or 150-year-old fence, not any greenie in the city, this fence is what prevents me from being able to burn like a proper Aborigine would. Because instead of just going and burning the country when the country needs to be burnt, I have to stop any fire on my place before it crosses the fence. And technically, if you own the fuel, you own the fire. So a lightning strike on my side of the fence is my legal financial responsibility because I own the fuel. So because of the fence, I can't burn to reduce the fuel. And because of the fence, any fire that happens on my place and threatens the fence is my fault. Assuming that we had a normal season, assuming we had normal winter rain, even when we're not in fire permit season, I have to ring up the burn notification line at least 24 hours before I ring my neighbours. I have to ring my neighbours 24 hours before I intend to light a burn, and those two notifications can last for a maximum of 3 weeks. So I can ring someone up and say, I'm going to do some burning. Don't worry about it if you see smoke from my direction unless I ring you up and tell you that I've got a problem. You have to do that because people see smoke and they ring Triple O, and Triple O has to know what is worth worrying about. During permit season, you've got to do the same thing, except you have to actually front up your permit issuing officer of your brigade and explain your case for why you want to light a fire in late spring or summer. If you've got a permit, it lasts for 3 weeks. You have to ring the burn notification line, the permit registration line, and you also have to ring your neighbours 24 hours before you start doing anything. So the idea that, oh, we've just had a shower of rain, I'll go and light some fires tomorrow morning, that ain't going to happen. It's never going to happen because you can't do the paperwork in the time required. And if it's edging into a drought, everything's too critical. And if you've got a permit and somewhere within your Rural Fire Service district, somebody else has got a Section 44 fire, which is a state bushfire emergency, all permits are cancelled. Because nobody wants to have all their fire trucks out dealing with the existing fire and then have somebody hoping not to lose control of a burn behind them in the safe zone. So, a month or so ago, I had 20 millimetres and I was really keen to do what burning I could, but I couldn't. I couldn't do any burning because of the fence. For 12,500 years at least, the oldest continually practiced religion on the surface of planet Earth, the rainbow serpent religion, was devoted to caring for country, looking after the environment. And fires were prevented by preventing the build-up of fuel burden, and fuel burden was prevented from building up by regular, overlapping, interlocking fire regimes that were designed to manicure and tailor the vegetation for maximum stable productivity. The reason Bill Gammage called his book the biggest estate on earth is because that's what all the Europeans called Australia. The artists, the geographers, the explorers. They said it just looks like one great big manicured estate, because it was. The entire country was under the active, constant personal management of 500 different language groups, and each language group had at least 12,000 years since the last ice age continually practicing the rainbow serpent religion, which started in Arnhem Land when the ice bridge, the land bridge to New Guinea, was flooded when the ice caps melted. But Australians have been living in Australia for 65, 75,000 years. They have grindstones for making flour in Australia that are, I think, 17,000 years older than the earliest flour grinding stones in anywhere else in the world. $250 years or less, the Euro peons. Euro, from Europe comes, peon. Peon began as Latin, still is a Spanish word. It means a landless, ignorant peasant who was lower than a turd. The Euro peons. the peasants who come from Europe, the landless, ignorant peasants. They didn't understand how anything worked. They fed the food plants for humans to their livestock. They cut down the forest and shut off the rainfall pumps. They caught all the fish in the rivers, they burnt the countryside, they eroded the topsoil and put it in the rivers where the fish used to be. Their motto is, if it moves, shoot it. If it doesn't move, cut it down. If you can't get your axe to bite, try dynamite. If that doesn't work, paint advertising slogans on it. Like they did with the bloody great rocks on the southern outskirts of Glen Innes in the 1930s. Craigie Burn in letters 10 feet tall, caravan park. The society I live on the outside edge of, the one I had to run away from, couldn't bear to live among them because living among idiots drives me mad. They light fires to make their food become cold. They burn coal to boil water, to blow steam on a windmill, to spin a wheel covered with magnets, to excite electrons, put the electrons through aluminium wire, feed that into an electric motor, to spin a shaft, to drive a compressor, to squeeze a gas. The gas gets hot, they radiate the heat away from the liquefied squeezed gas, then they let the pressure off the squeezed gas inside a thermally insulated cabinet, and when you let the pressure off a compressed gas, it gets cold. So it pumps the heat out of the cabinet. They light fires to make their food get cold. And when the exhaust gas from their refrigerator kicks the atmosphere into an accelerated greenhouse effect, some miserable, stupid, money-grubbing, self-centered asshole from the Life's Good factory will sell you a bigger air conditioner. So you can hide in your lounge room and not pay attention to what you're doing to the landscape with your economic activity. Not economic, nomic. E-C-O, capital G-N-O-M-I-C. Economic, from nomos, the Greek word meaning to know everything. Ecos, it is everything. The ecology is everything. The economists reckon they know how to squeeze more milk from the tits and squeeze more honey from the hives of the land. Make the cornucopia of plenty produce more milk and honey with economics. And instead they've created a desert everywhere they've gone. And now they're going to burn the desert. And our politicians here in Australia? Well, Johnny Howard, he accepted that global warming was a thing and he thought we should probably go down the road of a carbon tax. But Tony Abbott decided that he wanted to bet on Australians being selfish, ignorant, arrogant, complacent, smug assholes. So he said, don't pay attention to the science. You elect me and I'll let you have cheap electricity, cheap power, cheap fuel. Don't pay a carbon tax. That's all a lot of greeny nonsense. Where's Tony Abbott now? Bastard's got the hide to put on a yellow set of PPE and turn up with the Hornsby Rural Fire Service. Throwing teacups of water on the fucking continent-wide fires that he has spent his whole political career setting the conditions for. Little bit time-worn, but that was Badja Sparks who gave me that sticker. Gina farts rhinestones and Barnaby, the adulterous bastard father of Joyce. Stop fossil love, anybody but Barnaby. Bananaby. Vote green or die, global warming culls. If you understand and you agree with the top line, you accept the fact that culls is a verb. If you think that vote green or die is a crock of shit, you are a cull. I didn't buy it, it wasn't given to me. I paid another white Taliban, Andy Clatworthy, whose house was saved but he lost his shed and all his son's cars and fishing gear and camping gear. Printed these stickers for me 3 years ago. I had those printed when I was hoping that Tony Abbott and Barnaby Joyce were not going to get elected in. Didn't happen. Not to me, they got in. And the funny thing is, normally, when the Liberal National Party make a mess of Australia, Bob Hawke got in when industrial stagflation was the problem. Prices were going up, wages were going up, spending power was not going up. Labor Party got in. Bob Hawke, he and Keating, with their wages and prices accord, they fixed stagflation. And then Johnny Howard got in. Didn't like Paul Keating, couldn't stand Paul Keating. Paul Keating gave the Redfern speech. Paul Keating admitted that it was us who stole the land. It was us who stole the children. It was us who took babies away from mothers. It was us who raped the mothers. It was us who shot the fathers and the grandfathers. Oh shit, the Liberal and National Party couldn't cope with that. Oh no. No, you can't admit to what your grandparents did. They started what they call the culture wars. Johnny Howard came in. He got the mining boom. He got rivers of money flowing in. But he also told lies about babies being thrown overboard. He sent Australia to a second stupid war in the Middle East. Bloody Bob Hawke let us go in there for the first Iraq war, when NATO wanted to fire off all its anti-Soviet ammunition in the desert so that they could then issue rearmament contracts and thus stimulate 10 years worth of further economic prosperity in Europe and America. Australia went to that. So Howard, he got us to try and occupy Absurdistan. Still bloody well there. People threw out Howard. Rudd, Gillard, Rudd. What did they get? The global financial crisis. They solved the global financial crisis. Liberals and National Party said, oh, boo-hoo, sob, sob. You've spent all our savings on not having a financial crisis. They whinged and they bitched and they carried on about how they had to get in and make things more efficient. So, yeah, that happened. The Liberal Party got in, they privatised everything, so now nothing works and it costs a lot of money to not work. And they made themselves so horribly unpopular with maladministration and stuff-ups that they were probably going to get thrown out. And Clive Palmer came along. And somehow, Clive Palmer didn't win a single seat, but he managed to stop Labor from winning any significant power anywhere, because he stole votes from One Nation and he stole votes from Labor, and he didn't steal any from the Liberal Party, and he gave all his preferences to the Liberal Party or the National Party. And he spent billions on it, and that meant that Scott Morrison and his bunch of completely ineffective half-wits, the only ones who were left, because all the Liberals who actually had any talent could see defeat looming them, staring them in the face, and they resigned, quit. So Scott, the Morrison family's moron son, the Pentecostal foaming at the mouth, speaking in tongues, wannabe missionary to the South Sea Islands, is our prime muppet. Swag went to America and sucked up Donnie Trump's ass and participated in a bloody political rally for the Republicans. Our Prime Minister, lending his credibility to an American Republican Party rally. Our Prime Minister, who says that there's no link between anything that he might do in Parliament and the bushfires that are happening out in Australia, while carefully contriving to ignore the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years of decisions by politicians who had economists pissing in their ear to ignore the climate science. Because if you pay attention to the scientists, you'll never get anything done in Australia. Let's just get rid of all of the red tape. The National Party Deputy Premier in New South Wales has suggested that what we need is dams. We need to build dams. So the problem is, every time you go to build a dam, you get these local consultations and it bogs you down, and they all have reasons for why they don't want the dam to be built. And then you get these environmental science reports and they say it's a bad idea. So let's just ban local consultation for development applications. Let's ban environmental impact statements. We want dams, we'll bloody build them because we're the National Party. That's how we got into this fucking mess. Populist, brainless idiots trying to become more popular with their even more brainless fucking mates who follow them. I don't think the middle classes of Australia are going to get the point until all the highways have been cut by the fires, until we've lost entire suburbs. Alibag lost 60% of its houses and half the people in the community were members of the RFS. The only other places I can think of that go close to that is Danthonia. It's a religious-based community halfway from Glen Innes to Inverell, run by the Bruderhofen, who were a German schismatic bunch of breakaways who went to the excited status of Norte Armed Americano, and they're kind of like Amish but with computers. So they made a lot of money and they bought land. And they have a little religious community where all the women wear gingham dresses and headscarves and the men tell them what to do. It's very American. But they're all in the RFS. Another community I can think of where at least half the people would probably be in the RFS would be the Willows, which is an Aboriginal property owned by the Ngurrabal Land Council. It's out on the Ashford Road, northwest of Emmaville. I'm pretty sure they've got a pretty good RFS. Don't quote me on that one because I haven't been there and I don't know, but I have seen articles about it. Yeah, not many people, not many places can say that half of the people in that place are members of the Rural Fire Service. If Alibag lost 60% of their houses, how are you going to go when it's somewhere like Tamworth, out of water, and maybe 1% of the population are in the RFS? And everybody else relies on a grid-fed electric pump and a nylon garden hose, ringing 000 and hoping that a fire truck will arrive. Less than a year ago, an ad hoc self-forming subcommittee of retired fire chiefs and emergency services commissioners petitioned to get a meeting with the Prime Minister because they wanted to say, look, you're about to sell a squadron of C-130 Hercules 4-engine turboprop cargo aircraft. Each one can carry 15 tonnes of water when rigged as a large air tanker. Why don't you hang on to them and set that up as a squadron of air bombers, because we are going to have an absolutely horrific season for bushfires in 2019, 2020. Because 2018 we missed out on 34.5% of our rain. December 2018 was 3 degrees hotter as a month than was December 2007. 11 years, 3 degrees of global warming. This year, we have not received 30% of our rain. We're missing about 65% of it. I've had 240 millimetres or something out of 850 to 930, which is considered normal. Those fire chiefs asked for the meeting, and the Liberal National Party government in Canberra ignored them. I think they might have been offered an audience with the Minister for the Economy. Wasn't the right minister. Finally now, after the countryside is ablaze, 1.6 million hectares burned, they're offered an appointment with the Emergency Services Minister. The Prime Minister doesn't deign to speak to him because he wants to pray to Jesus and that'll solve everything. I got a tip for Scott Morrison. He needs to consider that the reason me and people like me are letting him get on with his day is because once upon a time there was a rabble-rousing communist agitator who'd been nailed up to a couple of planks of wood. And what he said was, to his God theory, forgive them. They know not what they do. And it's for moral and ethical reasons like that that people like me don't run around taking violent prophylactic action against people like Scott, the moron family's Morrison son. I spoonerised that one deliberately. Recently, one of my trolls, every YouTuber of note has to have a few trolls, I've got one. Babblebox, as the troll is called. Not what they call themselves, it's what I call the troll. Was bitching and whining and whinging and complaining that I, as a registered general nurse retired, should lament the fact that Reagan and Gorbachev never actually nuked each other in 1984. And her reasoning is that, oh, you're just a warmonger, you want people to die, you're an evil man. And my comment is, well, actually, no, there were 3.4 billion people alive back then. If the Warsaw Pact and NATO had had a thermonuclear exchange, you know, like 3 strikes each way, if China and India and Pakistan and Israel and France and England had all got involved, yeah, maybe 2 billion people would have died, perhaps 3 billion, but that would have left 500 million people in all the places where there was nothing worth the cost of dropping an atom bomb on. And they would have had a very much more intact ecology from which to try and rebuild the human race without having lost all of culture, all of civilization, all of the ecology of the biosphere. If Reagan and Gorbachev had nuked each other in 1984, 55% of all the carbon which humanity has extracted from underground, burned and injected into the sky since 1750 would still be underground, 55%. Global warming would have finished 25 years ago. I might be dead, I might be alive, I don't know, but humanity would definitely have a really good chance of living and thriving on a new basis, on the understanding that growth at all cost is bullshit, warriorism is wrong, survival of the fittest means the survival of the most cooperative. If they'd nuked each other as late as 1990, half of all the carbon we've dug up and put in the air would still be under the ground. Global warming would have finished 3 years ago. But we didn't do that. We prioritised making more flat screen televisions to throw in landfill. And now there's 7.7 billion of us. So twice as many people are going to suffer twice as much when the economy collapses and they've all got nothing to eat or drink and no light to see by while they starve and die of the thirst. Isn't that clever? We've spent 40 years feeding the ecology of planet Earth to somebody else's superannuation scheme. If you're old enough to have retired and sold up the McMansion and bought a Winnebago and spent 5 years driving around National Highway number 1, now is the time to have a stroke and drop dead. You've spent the kids' inheritance now, and pretty soon your grandchildren are going to wake up to the fact that you've eaten their play lunch. You selfish bastard. Look out. They're going to dig your fucking skeleton up and use your skull for a soccer ball just to give the shade of you the idea of how much contempt they hold you in for what you have done and what you have failed to do with their planet. It's not yours, it's not mine. This planet belongs to the unborn generations. And we've fucked it. My generation, my parents' generation. My parents were born in 1936 and 1909, so that's 2 generations hit with the same salvo. But it's my children's generation that are having to clean it up. My daughter on the lollipop sign, my son in his fire truck. There's a famous poem about the boy stood on the burning bridge. Well, yeah, my little boy drove over the burning bridge. And my Prime Minister can't see the connection between global warming and bushfires and Australian policy. He says, oh, the amount of carbon dioxide that Australia emits is nothing. A mere 1.5%. Trouble is, Australia only makes up 1/3% of the people in the world. So if 1/3 of a percent of the people are producing 1.5% of all the emissions, that means that compared to the planetary average, Australians are putting out 5 times more per person than everybody else. And that's an average figure. The Chinese, I think they're 22% of the population. They put out 25% of the carbon dioxide. Maybe it's 25% and 30%. The Americans are 2.5% of the world's population, and they put out 25% of the world's carbon dioxide. Americans, 10 times their per capita fair share allocation. But where Australia really comes in as the global scumbag, in terms of anthropogenic greenhouse gas release, is not the amount of carbon that we burn here to run our lifestyle in the first person. Where we shine, so to speak, is that we extract and export a shit pot full of coal and natural gas. All of Japan, they shut down their nukes because fuck you, Shima Daiichi frightened them. All of Japan runs on coal, Australian coal. Thailand, their whole power grid runs on Australian coal. Half of Asia is running on Australian coal or gas. The Indians want to open up the Galilee Basin for the Adani coal mine. It'll be the biggest coal mine in the world. Our politicians are really, really keen to let them do it because as far as they're concerned, investment in mining means that there will be jobs, and jobs means prosperity, and that means votes for them in the next election. 2 years away, 3 at most, because we run on a 3-year election cycle here. They literally don't give 2 knobs of goat shit for the compost heap. What'll happen to the environment down the track, because they hope to collect their parliamentary salary, sell their McMansion, buy their Winnebago, and fuck off to look at the beach. That is their plan. Destroy everything so that they can die rich. Because whoever dies with the most toys wins. Just ask Scott, the Morrison family's moron son. Ask Barnaby, the adulterous bastard fatherer. Ask Peter Dutton, the fucking Nazi from Queensland. Ask Josh Frydenberg, the dickhead who, when I wrote to him and said, listen, you've only got 21 days worth of fuel security in the whole bloody continent of Australia. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the ambulance, the fire services, the state emergency services and the police don't have 15 litres of emergency petrol between them because there is no regulation, there is no legislation that requires anybody in Australia to have any emergency fuel reserves, despite OECD requirements that we should have 90 days reserves. Josh Frydenberg's response to me personally was write me a letter and tell me that there are 47 boatloads of refined petroleum currently en route from the refinery overseas to Australia. And if the overseas shipping company that owns the boats feels like selling the oil in Australia, we'll get oil, we'll get petrol, we'll get diesel, we'll get kerosene. If not, it'll be like 1979 when for about 4 months Australia got no avgas because boatloads of it got halfway from Abu Dhabi to Australia and they turned around and went to Holland because the Dutch bid more. There was an avgas crisis. Now, Frydenberg's organised with Trumpy that in the underground disused salt mine where America stores 12 months worth of its consumption of crude oil, there's a little bit of pocket that's got a theoretical wall around it and a sticker on the theoretical wall that says, this is Australia's strategic petroleum reserve. And if they can't get it from anywhere else because war's broken out and there's no cargo shipping, Trumpy's going to fucking telekinetically, magically teleport the oil to Australia. Apparently. That's what the Liberal National Party say. Not very scientific, but you know, the Liberal National Party motto. You don't want to listen to the scientists. You listen to the scientists, you won't get anything done in Australia. You got to listen to the populists, the ideologues, the megalomaniacs. That's who's running Australia. The megalomaniacs. Flat out trying to sell the place to the richest bastard they can find in Asia. But give it 6 months, when all of Australia has burned, do you think the Chinamen are going to want to come and reclaim Australia for defaulting on the mortgage? Somehow, I don't think they will. I think they're going to stay there in China and they're going to make their own garden grow, and if they can't do that, then they can die of starvation there just as bloody easy as they can die of starvation here. So what makes you think they're going to come here? Like the tourism industry. You want to come to Australia and get cooked in a fucking bushfire? How much money do you want to pay for that experience? Things is crook at Waylard, Currajong, Budreldoon. Things is crook at Glen Innes. Things is bloody crook at Waitalabar. As Banjo Patterson said, things is crook in Tullarook, and we'll all be ruined, said Hanrahan. And the problem is, he were not bloody wrong, was he? Eh? He was not bloody wrong. What I'd like to know is why it is so that the only people who've had the rights of this for the last 40 years that I can think of is the greenies and the hippies. The environmentalists, the protesters, the activists. Why is it that we got everything right and the arseholes who made the problems now want to blame us for all of their failings? Why no hazard reduction burnings in the New South Wales National Parks? Well, that would probably be because Gladys Berejiklian, our state premier, cut $48 million and $48 million from the fire services budget, and she cut 125 jobs for park rangers in the National Park Service. Why is there no water in the Murray-Darling Basin in a drought? Well, that would be because Barnaby-ites, the Minister for Water and Agriculture and Resources and the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, he rejigged things so that instead of being able to pump water out of the river in times of high flow, high rainfall, he said, oh, no, the cotton needs to be watered in times where there's low flow and no rain. So going into this drought, Barnaby, the bastard father, adulterous Joyce, sucked the life out of the inland rivers. That's why the fish died a year ago. The last survivors are being put in tanks, theoretically so that they can be kept alive and re-released. But guess what? There's going to be nothing in the bloody river for the re-released fish to live on. Where are the crayfish and the shrimp and the mussels and the turtle? Where are they going to come from? The tortoises. Where's everything that the fish live on going to magically come from? I don't like the idea of political violence, and I really worry that one of these days the politicians who did this are going to finish up like fucking Mussolini, hanging from lampposts on piano wire, dangled from butchers' meat hooks, because they did this knowingly. They knew what they were doing and they did it anyway. Unless they take refuge in confirmation bias and Dunning-Kruger effect. Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns. They did not know what they did not know. And the more they did not know about what they did not know, the more confident and loud and wrong they were. Forgive them. They know not what they do. It's really difficult being a pacifist vegetarian some days. And other days it's easy. I just talk to you. Don't I? Hey? Hey? I just talk to you. And that restores my faith that the Creator knows what she's doing. Come on. Yes. You read it a second time, won't you? Eh? Come on. That's it. Yes. Ooh. It really is a worry, old girl, isn't it? Maybe, perhaps, hopefully, the micrometeorology will conspire and we will get wetted down and the fire will go around us on the day. It didn't bloody go around Alibag, and there are a lot of good people down there. And they were pretty good friends with their wildlife too. So I don't know how we're going to go. There's a lot of new stuff there, isn't there? Come on. Yeah, I'll let you walk on it. It's okay. Charlie? And he got it on the wing. So, on that wistful note, it must be ginger beer o'clock. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Keep on keeping on, and we will remain as long as possible. Ciao. Next time you hear anybody blaming the greens, put them onto this video. Pretty please. And then they will never be able to say that they were not told. Ciao.